Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello, how's everyone doing today? I want to start by apologizing about my sound quality. I'm on a secondary computer and the sound is not going to be great for this class, but I will do my best, okay? If anybody's out there, I notice we have some people out there. Go ahead and check in and let me know you're in the chat bar and tell me how the sound quality is for you. Can you understand what I'm saying? Hello, Dimitro. Are you there? Who do we have in the audience today? Go ahead and give me a quick shout out and let me know how the sound is working. Okay. Uh-oh. I seem to have lost people. Hopefully you're there. Let me go ahead and check. I'm typing a message real quick to see if we can get some feedback. I hope everything's all right. Okay, let's see. All right. Go ahead and type in the chat bar. Let me know you're there. All right. Well, I'm going to have to go ahead and just go on with this. Hello. That's interesting. That is interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go on today. So we're going to talk about the non-mental. This week we're talking a little bit about coping. Today we're going to talk about the sound is not the best, but I can hear you. Okay, right. And I am going to work on getting that fixed as soon as possible. I do apologize for my technical problems. Okay. We're going to talk about coping for the next couple of days. Today we're going to talk about the non-optimal coping strategies that we can use. And tomorrow we're going to talk about more flexible and better coping strategies. Okay, before we get started though, in chapter 3 they talk a little bit about time management, which I think is a very important student skill that you need to develop if you're going to be successful in this 2-year program. I'm sure each and every one of you are very, very busy and have tons of things going on. Johanna, I know specifically because I've met you in webinar, you've got some children, and I'm sure that takes up a lot of your time. And you said that you're also working, with all of your GI Bills and financing school. That creates all of this budget pressure, and so that creates a lot of work for you to do as a human being. And a lot of people have difficulties managing all of the challenges that they feel in a given day. Now, one of the things I want to start off by talking is a little bit about being an effective student. Now, how many of you waste time? Do any of you waste time? Maybe you set up priorities, things that you're going to do, and then you don't do them. Maybe you can never find your own time to get the activities that you need to do done because you're always helping other people. How many of you feel like you have to do things for your children or for your friends when you really think that they could do those things too? How many of you don't delegate responsibilities? How many of you have a life full of clutter with all kinds of stuff that gets in your way and keeps you from being productive? Have you ever been in the house where it's just too messy to even work? That happens to me too. How many of you have your phone out right beside you while you're trying to study and you can't get anything done because you keep watching YouTube videos and Netflix episodes? Do any of you have trouble avoiding interruptions? And how many of you get so frustrated because you can't do something perfect that you decide you're not going to do it at all? Right? These are all different ways in which you can find yourself challenged to complete the tasks that you have to complete. And I'm just going to go ahead and direct you at a couple of books that you might want to look at. There's a book called The Art of Saying No. And that's always good about learning how to avoid how to be able to delegate responsibility, how to say no to people, and how to avoid interruptions. I don't know if any of you folks have ever heard of Swedish death cleaning, but it's a habit that apparently is culturally popular in Sweden, where people my age begin to clean out their houses so that they're not so cluttered. And they call it death cleaning because the idea is that if you were to die, you don't want to leave this mess for your children to have to clean up. And so these are a couple of good books that you might use to help yourself if you are wasting time because you can't seem to get around to your priorities, or if the clutter and the complexity of life kind of gets in your way. This book is not only going to be talking about decluttering your house, but it's going to give you some tips for decluttering your life as well. And you know, I used to have trouble getting things done because I wanted everything I did to be perfect. And I'm just going to give you a quote here. A wise man once told me, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good." So if you can do something and it's good enough, and you just can't get it to perfect, sometimes it's better just to go with good than to go with nothing at all. You know, I have a student that I'm talking about in my Psych 150 class, and this student is thinking about dropping out of the class because they didn't make an A on the first exam. Now, you know what, folks? Making A's on exams and making A's in class are very useful. But you know what? You don't need A's to graduate. In fact, in this class right here, a C- will do just fine to allow you to do whatever it is you need to do as a professional. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Now, I'm going to ask you, hey, it's good to see you, Dimitro. Thanks for stopping in. Oh, and by the way, thanks for saying hello, Paul. Good to see you as well. How many of you procrastinate your assignments? If you do procrastinate, go ahead and put your name in the chat bar and say, I procrastinate. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and admit it myself. I am a major procrastinator. And you know, it's always because I tell myself that I focus better with time pressure. How many of you put things off because you think you'll do them better if the deadline comes to push you along, right? Do any of you procrastinate? Am I the only procrastinator here? Holy cow, that's amazing. All right, now here's the deal. I found that even as a professor, I still procrastinate, and this tends to decrease my ability to do projects as well as I want. So if you don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but you still want to get as good as possible, what we need to do is to learn how to prioritize things to the front of our list rather than the back of our list. How many of you like to do something as soon as you get it as an assignment? So if you get a homework assignment, you like to do it at the beginning of the week rather than the end of the week. Do we have anybody here who's more of a get it done now kind of person? You know, if you can do that, it makes you a much more effective person, because the people who procrastinate don't get as much time to complete the task, right? And you know what? Even though they want to do it good, they often have to focus on just getting it done so that they can get the reward, right? And so what we want to do is we want to learn how to reward ourselves for not procrastinating. Now, you may be able to get it done, but one of the things that you're going to find is that you're going to experience more stress and anxiety in your life if you're always up against tight deadlines. Okay, you're not a famous DC or New York lawyer. You don't have 150 hours to work a week. What you need to do is prioritize the 40 or 45 or 50 that you have to give so that you can become a more effective person. How many of you have a schedule? Do any of you have schedules of when you're going to study, what you're going to do? I'm sure some of you with children may have a schedule. I don't know about you, but I've found that scheduling my time makes me a more effective person. So I get up and I teach from 9 to 11. I spend 8 o'clock to 9 is when I prepare for my classes and make sure I've got all my technology straight. And then from 9 to 11, I teach. And then for me, I go from 11 to 1 is me going to the gym and getting my exercise in. From 1 to 4, I have to do, I work on my PowerPoint presentations for class. And then at night, I write quiz questions, usually from 8 to 10. And I have to admit, that's when I'm most disturbed and not paying attention, and I don't write my quiz questions as quickly as I should. Johanna has a schedule for her life. Why do you use a schedule, Johanna, and what do you schedule with it? If you could give us a little bit of detail about your schedule, I would really be interested in hearing that. Right? Now, the cool thing about this is it allows you to monitor your use of time. How many of you have ever spent 3 or 4 hours doing absolutely nothing because you didn't have a plan? This is a waste of time that will help you be a more effective person. I'm not trying to get you to do more work in a given day. I'm just trying to get you to do the work you have to do more effectively. When you set up time management, you have to clarify your goals. You have to tell yourself which is more important. And what you're going to find is that if you set up schedules, you're not going to miss important things that you have to do, right? And this also allows you, in my opinion, and I think I'm most productive from 1 to 4, so I always try to avoid doing anything from 1 to 4 because that's my creative time. That's my prime time, if you will. And so I like, by creating a schedule, I can block it off and make sure that I don't have things that occur during my prime creative time, right? Now, if you want to increase your efficiency, what I want you to learn how to do is not to keep papers around, to learn how to look at something, and if it gives you a directive, to do that, so you do not have to come back to the same task, the same paper multiple times. You know what? Try to get in the mood of knocking one thing out at a time. If you have a to-do list, you can work on knocking one thing out at a time. You can start with the most important, but also give yourself a reward by having something easy that you can knock out quickly to make you feel good. Figure out how to do similar tasks together so that you don't have to keep changing mental tracks when you do things, right? And you know what? When you do have downtime, it says make use of your downtime. I would argue make use of your downtime with stress-reducing strategies. For me, it's going to the gym. For me, it's doing puzzles. For me, it's meditating. Find a way to check out and get your mind refreshed when you have downtime. And then you have to just have the ability to relax. So Johanna has a schedule so I can complete everything I have to do. Johanna and I were talking about scheduling and budgeting. She is your prototypical mom who's got tons of things to do, and she has learned how to be a butt kicker with her time and her financial resources so that she can survive. I highly recommend talking to Johanna to figure out how you can learn how to make do with less, because moms have less time and less money than anyone else. And so by virtue of the fact that she's here in lecture, I would say that Johanna is probably an incredibly organized person. And thank you for coming again, right? Now, let's talk briefly about coping with stress. Each and every one of us feels stress. We talked about it last week. I suggested to you it's that physiological arousal that is set off by your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland, and it causes a bunch of physical changes to occur in your body. And I suggested that these physical changes are really good in short periods of fight or flight, but they are really bad for you over the long term. So, what I'm going to argue to you this week is that you do not have to experience stress, even if you are under a lot of challenge. Because stress, in the end, is a mental thing. If you don't perceive something as stressful, then the physiological changes in your body won't occur, because it's your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings about what's happening to you that cause the biological changes, okay? A bill being late in and of itself doesn't cause a physiological change. If I think about it and it gets me angry and stressed, then that causes the physiological change. So to the degree that we can learn how to cope with those things that challenge us in life, we are going to experience better physiological health and better mental health and life happiness outcomes. So coping refers to your efforts to master, reduce, or tolerate the demands that are created by stressors in your life. It's your ability to deal with the things that would stress you out. Now, what's a stressor for you? Johanna, it might be having kids. Johanna, it might be going to school. For me, it might be managing my son's schooling as well. For me, it's getting the cars fixed. For me, it's making sure that I have lectures prepared and that I'm treating students effectively when they have problems. So we all have these demands that are placed on our body, and each and every one of these demands can create stress. And coping is your ability with learning how to handle these demands. Now, people cope with stress in many, many ways. And you know what? The people who are best at coping with stress don't just do it one way. And you know what? There are lots of different ways to cope with stress. Some of them are better than others. And so that's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of days. The different ways in which you can cope with stress, which ones are better and which ones are not quite as effective. And I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of being flexible with your coping methods. Sometimes it's best to just ignore a problem if it's going to go away on its own. If your rent is due, that stressor cannot be coped with by forgetting about your rent payment, right? There are different types of strategies for dealing with stress, and you need to be a flexible person when you when you deal with stress. And so we're going to talk about these different ways, and I'm going to invite you to incorporate them into your life. Okay, now coping flexibility is going to be related to positive mental health outcomes such as increased resilience and reduced anxiety. So if you learn how to be flexible in your coping strategies, you, I promise, will feel better and will have less stress in your life. How many of you sometimes feel overwhelmed by your stress? Hopefully, if you're flexible, you can learn to more effectively deal with the feelings that you have. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about coping strategies that have limited value, the ways that maybe you ought not cope. And then next week, we're going to talk about Albert Ellis's ABC model, and we're going to talk about more effective ways of learning how to cope with the stressors in your life. All right. So what are some of the stressors in your life? The bill is due. You have to pay for school. You need a textbook for school. You just got sick and have a doctor's bill. You just dropped your phone and it's broken and now you don't have a phone. These are all different ways that life can stress you out. And so we're going to talk first about this concept called learned helplessness. Now, the old behaviorist Ivan Pavlov and his researchers found that if you put a dog in a situation where they're being punished and they can't get out of that punishing situation, the dog will begin to demonstrate neurosis. So if you put a dog in a situation where they're being shocked or penalized and you don't give them any way to get out of that, after a while, that dog will develop a neurotic personality. And if you put them in a different situation where they can get away from punishment, the dog, instead of getting away from punishment, will just sit there and shiver neurotically, right? So sometimes people wind up in situations where they have such bad outcomes for such a long time that they actually begin to believe that there is no way to avoid the bad things in their life. Now, there are certain situations in your life where this is true, but some people have these experiences early in life and they develop a personality style we'll call learned helplessness. How many of you have ever been around a person who has an easy solution to a problem but just won't take it? how somebody is in a relationship where the most obvious course of action is to leave that relationship. A person doesn't have a driver's license, but they won't go down to the driver's license office and get their license reinstated. How many of you have seen somebody who has an obviously simple way to solve a problem and yet refuses to because they are so stressed out? These people may be experiencing what we call learned helplessness. And the crazy part is that Ivan Pavlov found that dogs can be put in one situation where they can't escape punishment, and then they will carry these feelings of helplessness over to new situations where they can affect change and make their outcomes better. And so what we find is that there are some people, and you may be that kind of person, who has developed a sense of learned helplessness. And you know what? Sometimes this causes people to give up on life. Why should I bother going to school? It's not going to make a difference. All I ever do is fail in school. It's not going to make a difference if I get my license. I don't have a car anyhow, and I'll never be able to get a car. How many people give up and make these tragic statements that seem to explain how they're never ever going to be successful anyway? I'm never going to have any money because I have this medical bill in front of me, so why should I try to get a good job? I'm always going to be poor. And this represents what I would say is a negative cognitive interpretation of an event. And what you're going to find is there are two kinds of people in the world. There are some people who tend to see the glass as half full, and there are those people who tend to see the world as the glass as half full. Which one of those kinds of people? I've been in that situation of learned helplessness, says Paul. I didn't think of that way, but I really felt emotionally crippled and disabled that the simplest tasks were Herculean. Exactly. And it's weird, and I'm talking about this as if I've never felt helpless or been that way, but I've had these same feelings, Paul, and that's why I feel like I can talk about them with a little bit of resonance. But it is completely normal to have those experiences, Paul. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to develop the kind of person who is pessimistic, who sees failure as wide. It's I fail at everything I do, and I always fail, and nothing will ever get changed in the will never change in the future. That's what we would call a pessimistic explanatory style. And you know what? These are the same kind of people that when something good happens, they'll say, "Wow, I got lucky." Have you ever had a person that always says that anything that good happens to them is because they're lucky? They don't deserve this. They passed this test because it was easy. They passed this class because they were lucky. They got this because this happened that wasn't under their control. You're going to notice some people like to take success as being under their control, and failure is something that just happens to them occasionally. These are optimistic people. And then other people are going to take failure as personal and something that they always do, and they're going to send success as something outside of their control. And this is what's known as a pessimistic personality style. And so what I'd like for you to do, and we can even talk about it this Wednesday when we get together in webinar, I might even have an optimism scale for you to fill out, Paul, and we'll see if we're that kind of person. Now, that doesn't mean that if you can't be a research chemist that you should say, I'm going to be a chemist or nothing. Sometimes we do have to adjust our goals, right? And so you might want to be an NFL football player, but if you're a 5'10", 180-pound lineman, unfortunately, my friend, you're about 130 pounds short and 5 inches short of being one. It's just not going to happen. So I'm not talking about never giving up and keeping ridiculous goals, but what we need to do is we need to learn how to look at our failures and find out where we need to work harder or where we need to readjust our goals. Giving up is not goal adjustment is not giving up. So you may come in here telling me you want to go to Duke and be a medical doctor, and that may be well and good. And if you've got the scores too, if you've got the intellect too, fine. But you know what? You may find out at some point that it's not something you love, or it's not something that you're perfectly suited to. And it's okay to adjust your goals. You know, at one time I wanted to be an opera singer because I had such a beautiful voice. And I will always love you. See, that's a beautiful voice, right? But after a while, my mom said, son, maybe the opera just ain't for you. And so I readjusted my goals and decided to be a psychologist because I'm a good talker and not so good a singer. And so goal adjustment is not giving up, but giving up and deciding to do nothing. Yeah, I know what you mean with that. Uh, but sometimes, but giving up and doing nothing is not the way you want to be. Okay, now, what are other ways? How many of you get angry when things don't turn out the way you want them to? How many of you get frustrated and then lose your temper? If I had to pick my one non-optimal way of dealing with stress, I would say this is it. I tend to get angry really easily when things do not go my way. This has always been my cross to bear, and I, till this day, work on my temper, because a lot of times, as it said, a lot of times I take my temper out on people who really didn't do anything wrong. In fact, I've got to call a friend back up and apologize for getting a little out of line this past weekend because of my temper. And so what I have to do is learn how to control my aggressive behaviors. Now, some people say, you know what, if I yell and I scream, I at least get the emotion out of me. And we might say that you're looking for the catharsis. So I don't know if you are the kind of person that says, well, when something bad happens, I yell and scream at it and throw something, and it makes me feel better. If you argue that, what you're arguing is for the idea of catharsis, which was a term also coined by that fellow Freud. We talked about him a couple of days ago, Paul, and you really liked Freud. This is another Freudian term. He would argue that getting your aggression out actually allows you to get past it and be a happier person. But actually, research shows that people who are engaged with aggressive behavior tend to, instead of being less aggressive, they tend to be more aggressive later on. So if you look at this chart here, it's talking about the correlation between different things that of different strengths. So you might say, wow, if you smoke cigarettes, you really have a high likelihood of developing lung cancer. That's actually probably that's a very strong correlation. Those two things are going to happen. Okay. However, a correlation that is even higher than that, that is almost as high. And actually, if you look at all these yellow charts, these are all the different links between being exposed to smoke and developing lung cancer. And so passive smoking at work, secondhand smoke, exposure to asbestos and developing cancer. You know what? There's a stronger link between seeing my media violence and becoming aggressive later in your life than there is with other of these things that are associated with cancer. So what I want you to know is that being cathartic isn't going to make you less aggressive later. It's actually going to continue on in more aggressive behavior. And aggressive behavior, angry behavior, is that high stress behavior that's going to cause the hypothalamus and the pituitary to create those stress hormones in your body, which are harmful to you. So no, getting angry and just kicking a dog, as they say, is not going to be a very adaptive way of dealing with your stress. So before I mentioned we could just give up and just say I can't do anything about it, not a great strategy. We could get aggressive and use our emotions and think that those are going to help us deal with our stress. neither one of those is going to be a great way of dealing with the stress in our life. Okay, now another stressor. Uh-oh, my little chart here is kind of funky looking. Some people eat their frustration or drink their frustration. I don't know if any of you have ever been like this. Man, I've had such a stressful week. I'm going to go to the bar and unwind with some beers and a shot of liquor. You know, having a beer every once in a while, maybe if you want to reduce your stress, is okay. But there are people who can get into habits where that becomes the main stress reduction tool. And I would suggest to you that indulging yourself in these types of self-destructive behaviors are not healthy. Some people eat a lot when they get anxious and they get stressed. I noticed, I lost 50 pounds about 5 years ago. I'm going to share that strategy with you later on this week. But in order to do that, I had to realize how often I was eating foods out of anxiety and boredom. I would walk past the refrigerator and just grab something out of the fridge without thinking about it. And in a sense, I ate my anxiety, and it caused me to grow and get quite obese. I do realize that at one time I won't say a drinking problem, but I was having drinks regularly throughout the week. And so I was eating improperly. I was drinking a little too much alcohol. Now I quit smoking over 20 years ago, but you know what? When I smoked, that was also a behavior that I think I did out of anxiety and restlessness. And so one of the ways in which people try to relieve stress is by doing something they say is a favorite pastime. Well, having a few beers is my pastime. Well, you know what? Making myself a cool dessert is something that relaxes me. Having a cigarette relaxes me. Well, you know what? These are things that can actually become problematic and have bad outcomes in and of themselves. Maybe the smoking relaxes you, but it's going to be highly related to your likelihood of getting lung cancer later in life. Having something to eat may relax you and calm you down, but if it blows up your BMI and suddenly your blood pressure and cholesterol levels are really high, that's not useful either. So these, I would say, can become compulsive patterns of coping with stress that are not very healthy. Now, I'll bet some of you probably spend a lot of time on the internet. How many of you spend 5 or 6 hours on social media every day, Facebooking or Instagramming or Twittering, right? Now, your book talks about internet addiction as another way of dealing with stress. And I find myself, even today, sometimes I'll find myself spending an awful lot of time on the internet when I get bored, when I get anxious, when I get angry with my wife. I will find myself getting on social media and spending too much time on it. Now, social media isn't going to give me cancer. It's not going to make me obese, but it is going to decrease my effectiveness as a person. So, one way of dealing with stress that's negative is just giving up. This idea of learned helplessness. Some people let their emotions get the better of them. And some people find compulsive behaviors that decrease their effectiveness or add to other bad qualities about their physical health. And so these are what I would call coping procedures of very limited value. Now, occasionally I do meet people, and these are some of the people that break my heart the worst. And these are the people that just think that they deserve all the bad things that are happening to them in life because it's their fault. I did this, and so this is what happens to me. This is the worst thing ever, and it's all because of my fault, and I am completely worthless. And there are some people who get in the habit of blaming themselves. Have any of you ever been in the habit of blaming yourself for things? I had a difficult teen and early 20s years because I had a lot of anxiety and I dealt with it and a lot of negative ways. And aside from indulging in compulsive behaviors, aside from my bad temper, aside from just dropping out of school because I didn't think I was going to be a straight A student at UNC Chapel Hill, I also blamed myself too. And I think a lot of my problems came because I was too hard on myself. And I find that students can be too hard on themselves. And some of you are really too hard on yourself. And we're going to talk about the ABC model tomorrow in the context of positive helping, but I'm just going to give you a preview of it by talking about this fellow named Albert Ellis. And he had this model called the Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy model. And basically, what he said was a lot of people spent time engaging in a habit of thinking he called catastrophic thinking. Catastrophic thinking. When something bad happens to you, it is not the end of the world. But how often do you have a bad outcome and think that this is the worst thing ever? If I don't get into Carolina, then I'll never be a nurse. If I don't get into nursing school this semester, then I'm a complete failure. How many of you have ever said, if I don't get that job, that would be the worst thing ever? I want you to know that I've been looking for jobs in the mountains because I really, really want to move to Asheville. And I've been turned down for 2 different jobs in the last year. What I would call perfect jobs for me in Asheville, North Carolina. I gave great interviews. My resume was awesome. In both of these times, I was turned down for these positions. Now, 20 years ago, I would have said this is the worst thing ever. My life is over. I'm a completely worthless person. And this is what Albert Ellis would say is catastrophic thinking. But as you get older in life, hopefully if you can develop some perspective, what you'll begin to understand is that things happen and they aren't always because you are the worst or this is the end of life or nothing could be worse than this. So a lot of times when we're catastrophic thinkers, we tend to attribute failures to our personal shortcomings. Oh, they didn't like me because I'm a horrible teacher. No, I'm a great teacher with great credibility. They just didn't want me for that particular situation. I got the letter that told me that I didn't get the job, and I could have focused on that as being, wow, that is the only thing that matters. I am not getting that. They told me they didn't want me. I could focus on the negative, and I could just focus on that negative feedback. But you know what? It was some feedback. It was negative, and then I let it go. And you know what? 20 years ago, I would have gotten really angry at that rejection letter, and I would have found 100 reasons why I'm not worthy, and I would have found 100 reasons why that hiring committee was wrong, because I would have made it all about this catastrophe of not getting a job. And you know what? I could be overly pessimistic and say there's never going to be another opportunity in the mountains. But you know what? There are. And in fact, I've got some really cool plans lined up for Wake Tech during the next year. So, I just don't want to be pessimistic about the future, but a lot of people can get pessimistic about the things that happen to them. According to Albert Ellis, if you blame yourself and think that this is all because you are a failure and you will never succeed, you're going to experience distress and depression. All right. And when bad things happen, it's going to really, really affect your level of psychological well-being. And sometimes people with PTSD who've been in a bad situation, either they've been attacked, they might have been involved in a sexual assault or some sort of physical attack, or they might have been in a situation, we typically think of PTSD in combat situations where a friend died. A lot of times people blame themselves as if it was their fault that this bad thing happened. And you're going to see depression and anxiety in people, especially those people who are suffering from the negative outcomes in life. I'm going to show you my cousin who came to visit me this weekend, and This guy has a serious health condition, but I have never seen anybody who has a more positive view on life than my cousin Mike. He's an absolute rock star, though you've never met him. This is the coolest guy in the state of North Carolina. And this is a guy who hasn't let the negativity of these events, of his serious health issues, hasn't let it slow him down one little bit. Okay? Now, defensive coping. Now, one of the things that I could have done was I could have blamed the person that didn't hire me. And that would be what we might call projection. And it's not listed here, but it's one of Freud's defense mechanisms. I might have made it, I might have said that that's a stupid hiring committee. That hiring committee wasn't honest. They weren't looking for a white male. They were looking for somebody else. I could have made up all of these reasons why they were being underhanded and dirty. And that would have been me being defensive and not understanding that really it's me that's, my feelings are hurt and I have to learn how to deal with them and look at this from everybody's perspective. But most people can't do that. Instead, what they do is they try to protect their own feelings by coming up with some rationalized lie about why they didn't get the job. Okay, so defense mechanisms, as I mentioned with Freud, it's a largely unconscious reaction that protects a person from unpleasant emotions. So if I didn't get the job, yeah, I wasn't the best person on that who came in front of that board. That's a bit of negative feedback about me. The question is, am I going to spin into total loserdom? Oh my God, that's all me, like on the last slide, and blame myself? Or am I going to pretend that my feelings weren't hurt at all and that hiring committee was a bunch of stupid fools? If I'm doing that, then what I'm doing is engaging in self-deception. I'm basically not telling myself the truth about how I feel about the event. I didn't get the job. For about 10 minutes, I felt bad. I really did. I looked at the letter and I was like, oh man, that's not fair. And for a few minutes, I thought about all the unfair reasons why that might have happened. But then I let it go and I realized that I was just disappointed, but this was not the end of the world. Some people can't admit that they are really hurt about something bad that's happening to them. I don't know if you've ever been left by a boyfriend or girlfriend or had a friend left by a boyfriend or girlfriend who can't admit that they are crushed by this breakup. And instead, they act like it was no big deal. Well, I didn't really like Bill anyhow. Well, you and Bill dated for 12 years. Of course you liked Bill. Admit your feelings. But some people will hide themselves from their true feelings. Now, we presented some defense mechanisms in chapter 2 or chapter 1 when we were talking about Sigmund Freud. But these are some more defense mechanisms. If you remember, I suggested to you that his daughter Anna actually had a whole book where she identified dozens of different types of defense mechanisms. And these are ways in which people lie to themselves. So you can deny the effect, denial, refuse to acknowledge or face up to the unpleasant realities of one life. I could actually tell myself that I hadn't lost a job and that there was still a chance that I was going to get the job. Who knows? Maybe I might run for president and not win the election, but refuse to admit that I lost the election. That would be an example of denial. If I were to run for president, lose the election, and then refuse to admit it and say, no, I didn't lose that election, I would be engaging in a defense mechanism we call denial. I'm just saying that's an example that popped into my mind recently. Or, you know what? I might intellectualize the problem by looking at why I didn't get the job, and I might come up with 15 or 20 reasons that explained why the hiring committee was being biased. Well, they didn't want a male over 50. They didn't want a white male. They didn't want this. And I might intellectualize it and talk about how there was some sort of conspiracy going on in the background. I might have tried to intellectualize it by coming up with a conspiracy. And again, these are defense mechanisms, just ways of hiding ourselves from the unpleasant emotions that we feel. And so let's go back. So there are different ways that you can negatively deal with the stress. So coping is your ability to deal with the negative emotions that occur as you fail and have challenges crop up in front of you. And there are some ways in which you can respond to stressful events that are not that healthy. You can give up and just say there's nothing I can do and wallow in your own misery. Yes. Or some people choose to use anger. When things happen that stress them out, they lash out at people and they think it's going to make them feel better later on. Some people, on the other hand, will get into habits that decrease their temporary anxiety, like smoking or drinking or eating, and they do this, but the fear, the anxiety never goes away, and the person may adopt some bad behavior patterns which lead to health challenges. Some people, on the other hand, just get angry at themselves and feel like there's nothing that they do right. And they make these events so negative and so these failures so negative and so tragic that it really eats them up inside and causes them to feel unhealthy. And then some people create lies and try to hide themselves from their own emotions when things come that stress them out. And so here's the deal. As I suggested to you, we all use multiple coping strategies. I've admitted to you the ways in which I use non-adaptive coping strategies, okay? Anger and blaming myself are two of my biggest. I get angry at other people, and then blaming myself, I get angry at me. Those are two ways in which I catastrophize and make my negative, stressful events worse for myself. What I want you to do today is I want you to be honest and ask yourself, which of these negative coping strategies do I really use? Do I lie to myself? Do I feel just bad about myself and think that this is the worst thing ever when something happens to me? Do I engage in self-destructive behavior patterns that are compulsive? Do I lose my temper? Or do I just sit and let things happen to me? Which way do you cope with stress that is non-optimal? And I'm not criticizing any of you. I'm not saying you must, but I'll bet if you're a human being like me, you've probably used these non-productive coping strategies. Now, on tomorrow, we're going to turn over a new leaf, and we're going to talk about one way of reconceptualizing stress in our mind, which makes the things that happen to us a little easier to bear. And one way in which I've really decreased my level of stress. You won't believe it. You'll think I'm cuckoo, and I'm kidding. But I have learned how to reevaluate the things that happen in my life, and it's decreased the stress and the negative behaviors that I engage in as stress relieving techniques. Okay? I hope each and every one of you have a great day. Thanks for coming. I am sorry about the difficulty on Thursday. That's one of those stressful events that would have left me kicking and screaming for hours, but I've learned to deal with it in my latter years, and so Thursday's distraction wasn't as bad for me as it usually is. Johanna, you have a great day. Dimitro, thanks for coming. Paul, thanks for coming. Y'all have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow morning. Bye.